Hi, me llamo Jose Guillermo. My preferred pronouns are he, his. I identify as a gay Puerto Rican, Caribeño, and also Latino. I speak both English and Spanish, a mixture of both sometimes. Mi familia es de Puerto Rico, so don't call me gringo or americano because I feel very connected to my Puerto Rican heritage. This is what looking bilingual means to me.
What does being bilingue mean when we think of Jose? Can you draw us a picture?
Like when I hear that question, I think that I wasn't always bilingual. It brings me back to the moment I moved to the United States. That change and that the act of becoming bilingual. I think of the change. I think of the differences between the two Joses that speak the two different languages, and then what happens when like I meet people that are able to understand me in both. I think that for some reason it feels like I'm different people when I speak different languages. In Spanish, when I'm in Puerto Rico, I'm always cracking jokes, making people laugh. When I'm here, I do still try to like make jokes, but then they come across as dad jokes most of the time. Or sometimes, sometimes they don't land. So it's different. I would say that's what it means for me to be bilingual, to just like have like all of these like differences within myself, but then also like being able to like converge them and like say that this is who I am.
I think we're also lucky, if we're able to be bilingual, no matter at what level. I think we're really lucky to be able to be bilingual. Who gave you the gift of bilingualism? Because that's how I like to look at it. It's a gift.
I would say my grandma. She lives in Puerto Rico. She always lived in Puerto Rico, but she was always fascinated with the English language. She was always like enamored with the English language. She would read stuff in English all the time.
Wow.
Um, and also like she's into like paranormal stuff, like things about ghosts,
Yes,
um,
me too. Go grandma.
divination. Yeah. So she would always read like and watch like programs in English, and she would always tell me like, oh, like you need to learn English, let's practice. So sometimes I would go over her house and she'll tell me to do chores in English. Um, so I always connected that language with my grandma, and since I've always felt very close to her, it really did push me to just like learn English to just become more like her, and also um, so to be able to like practice more with her, and yeah, to like just like continue growing our relationship together. Yeah.
That's wonderful and that's beautiful. And I see it. That's the same thing for me. It's my grandma, my grandpa. I grew up at home with them. And so I'd speak in English with my mom. I spoke in Spanish with them. All together, we all spoke Spanish. And it's a beautiful thing when you get that from, it's like literally a passing down. Um,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. But I'd love that she encouraged you to speak this language that wasn't necessarily in your family otherwise, correct?
It's not. No, it's not.
Yeah. So I mean that's above and beyond. What were the before and after effects of becoming bilingual for you? Because while you started it with your grandmother in Puerto Rico, is it correct to say that it really kicked into gear once you moved here? And how did that change things afterwards?
Even though I was practicing English in Puerto Rico, I still wasn't native, and I still, when I first came here, I was like so lost, so disconnected and isolated because I didn't speak English. Especially when I went to the library one time and I saw the Spanish section. I was looking at the titles and I was like seeing what I was interested in, and for some reason that felt very limited. Feeling that desire to like learn English, to like see what's beyond that aisle. I wanted to like read more, and I wanted to like feel what it was like to just being able to just read in two languages. And also, I think that another effect was being able to connect to more people, not just only Spanish native speakers, but also like a lot of my friends here are identify as Puerto Rican or as Latino, and they don't speak a word in Spanish. So it's also like connecting to those people that look like me, have a similar culture, but they don't necessarily speak the same language.
And it's funny because this all, and we haven't spoken about what it is that you do and what your passion is for your work. But can you explain a little quick? Because I feel like that all just like kind of translated into what it is that you do professionally.
Yeah, because when I first came here, I was starting taking English classes. I stopped taking Spanish classes. I started having friends that only spoke English, I stopped having friends that spoke Spanish. My English kind of like boosted up, and then my Spanish was kind of like left and stayed, and it didn't grow. And then so I felt a loss. I felt like one time I went to Puerto Rico and I noticed there was a change, that I wasn't speaking like the young people were speaking. I realized that loss or that change. So I went back to school, and then I started taking Spanish classes. I did my bachelor's in Spanish, and I started becoming more aware of Puerto Rican culture, Puerto Rican literature, Puerto Rican history, and also that all of that is connected to language, like obviously. So I feel like my relationship to that language changed going to school, and also becoming a Spanish teacher. Uh, like it's very different from the Jose that first came to the United States. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, what a beautiful journey, and what a beautiful journey through. I feel like without having literal powers, you're kind of like a Matilda. Like goes to the library, finds her, her superpower, sort of thing, and you found your superpower in that way, through literature and through like looking at these two languages and their relationship and kind of developing yourself, in these two avenues. And people don't realize that it really does take that effort. Is it fair to say that language has affected your relationship with your identity and culture? I know you mentioned a little bit about going back to Puerto Rico eventually and having that time that was like, oh, I'm different, or I notice a difference.
It did make me realize that I was like, that my language was a little bit different than those in the island. That feeling of being different people, like it's very present in my life. So in Philly, I speak Spanish with my coworkers. I teach Spanish, so I'm all the time I'm involved in the language. But then when I come here, it's so different. So I feel like, yeah, having those negotiations, it's something that wasn't there before. I felt more unified, I guess. More, I know how to act like now in the present.
Mm-hmm.
But then I wouldn't know how to act. My life in Philly kind of like clash with my life here. My friends over there, like they identify as Hispanic or identify as like their according to like where they came from. Like if tengo una compañera like who identifies as like Mexican. So it's different when they come across the word Latino, Latinx, because they don't necessarily feel as connected to that label as I do, because they identify more with nationality. Yeah, so it's different. So when I tell them, oh yeah, I have a Latino theater company, so they already make the connection. Oh, so it's not in Spanish. So, or it's not necessarily in Spanish. Also the only one that studies Latinx studies over there.
Interesting.
They do Latin American literature. I do Latinx. So it's like a big difference.
So when do you feel the most connected with your identity?
I feel more connected when I'm around Latinx people, Caribbean people specifically, like Puerto Riqueño, Dominicano, and even Cubanos. Like hearing their accent, hearing like how fast they speak, like I feel very connected to that. I relate a lot. Also when I watch movies, like Caribbean movies, I like learning how art can express like history, historical facts. So all of that things like make me feel more Puerto Rican. Also doing my research. When I do my research, I feel like I'm connected to my identity because I'm learning like the history, the people that came before me that basically have the same like thoughts or the same interest in research. I do a lot of Afro-Caribbean Latinx literature, so it does touch a lot on spirituality and just being familiar with living and experiencing like spirits and all of that. So growing up with my grandma, who is the daughter of an espiritista in Puerto Rico, so that recognizing that when I'm reading and recognizing like that heritage, it does make me feel more connected doing my research.
Yeah, when you said like other Caribeños and stuff like that, I think especially when you're somewhere that you're not necessarily from, that's like such a highlight. You get that like warmth, and you're like, oh yes,
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
in this case, yes, my people, but even if they're not like my people, exactly my people, it's like, oh, there's that connection there. And
for some reason, it makes me feel safe. Like when I'm like walking and I hear somebody just speak Caribbean Spanish, like I just like feel like that. in my chest.
I think of my backyard in North Bergen, New Jersey, with all my beautiful trees and my uncle smoking cigars, and I'm like, you know, and I'm like, for me, that's my happy place. You know, if you could go back and send yourself a message, what would that be?
I would tell myself to be ready, to be open for the change. It might seem scary and it might um, feel sometimes that you're just having experiencing this loss of language and this loss of identity. But eventually, as like you teach yourself and you also develop this like interest of like retouching or yeah, retouching is the word, yeah, like reconnecting
Mm-hmm.
with your Puerto Ricanness. I feel like your connection to your language is gonna grow. It's gonna evolve into something much more beautiful that you're gonna feel proud of.